The wagon rattled over another frozen rut in the mountain trail, and Rebecca Morgan pulled the threadbare blanket tighter around her shoulders, knowing it would do no good. She had been cold for as long as she could remember, but this Wyoming winter of 1876 cut through her like a blade made of ice. Her fingers had gone numb hours ago, and she could no longer feel her toes inside her worn boots. The driver beside her, a gruff man named Patterson who owed her late father a favor, hadn't spoken in miles. She didn't mind. Words took energy she didn't have. They were supposed to reach Seligman by nightfall, but the sky had other plans. Snow began falling in thick, heavy flakes that swirled in the wind, and visibility dropped to nearly nothing within minutes. Patterson cursed under his breath and pulled the horses to a stop. "Can't see the trail no more, miss," he said, his voice tight with worry. "We're in trouble if we don't find shelter soon." Rebecca tried to answer, but her teeth chattered too hard. She managed a nod instead. Everything felt distant, like she was watching herself from somewhere far away. Was this what freezing to death felt like? A strange sort of peace settling over you while your body slowly gave up. Patterson urged the horses forward, moving slowly, feeling for the trail more than seeing it. Then one of the wheels hit something, lurched sideways, and snapped with a crack that echoed through the white wilderness. The wagon tilted violently, throwing Rebecca into a snowbank. She landed hard, the impact knocking what little breath she had from her lungs. "Miss Morgan." Patterson scrambled down, his face pale with fear. He tried to help her up, but his hands were shaking as badly as hers. The wagon was broken, one wheel completely shattered. They were stranded in a blizzard with night coming fast, Rebecca's vision blurred. She could hear Patterson talking, panicking, but his words seemed to come from underwater. She thought about her parents, both dead from fever last spring. She thought about the aunt in Seligman, who had reluctantly agreed to take her in, a woman she'd never met. She thought about how unfair it was to have survived so much only to die on this frozen mountain. Then she heard something else, a sound that cut through the howling wind. Patterson heard it too and went silent. It came again, closer now. The heavy crunch of footsteps in snow, steady and purposeful. A figure emerged from the white chaos, so tall and broad that at first Rebecca thought she was hallucinating. But no hallucination could look that solid, that real. The man was massive, easily over 6 feet tall, with shoulders that seemed to block out the storm behind him. He wore a thick fur coat and had long dark hair that fell past his shoulders, dusted with snow. His face was all hard angles and sharp edges, weathered by countless winters, with a dark beard that covered his jaw. But it was his eyes that caught her, pale blue like ice, but somehow warmer than anything she'd felt in months. "You two are damn near frozen to death," the man said, his voice deep and rough like gravel. He looked at the broken wagon, then at Rebecca lying in the snow, and made a decision in seconds. "My cabin's not far. Can you walk?" Rebecca tried to stand, but her legs wouldn't cooperate. The world tilted again, and she would have fallen if the mountain man hadn't moved with surprising speed, catching her before she hit the ground. He lifted her like she weighed nothing at all, cradling her against his chest. Even through all the layers of clothing and fur, she could feel the heat radiating from him. It was the first time in months, maybe years, that she'd felt truly warm. "I'll come back for you and help with the horses," the man told Patterson. "But I need to get her inside now or she won't make it." Rebecca wanted to protest, to say she'd be fine, but her body had given up on pride. She let her head rest against the man's solid chest as he carried her through the storm. His heartbeat was steady and strong beneath her ear, and she focused on that sound, using it to anchor herself to consciousness. He moved through the blizzard like he'd done it 1,000 times, never hesitating, never slowing. She had no idea how he could see where he was going when everything looked the same to her, all white and swirling and deadly. The cabin appeared suddenly, a dark shape against the snow. He kicked the door open and carried her inside, going straight to the fireplace where embers still glowed from an earlier fire. He set her down carefully on a thick bearskin rug right in front of the hearth, then moved quickly to build up the fire. Within minutes, flames were crackling and heat was pouring out, but Rebecca couldn't stop shaking. The cold had sunk too deep into her bones. Her whole body trembled violently and her lips had turned blue. The mountain man saw and didn't hesitate. He started removing her wet outer layers, his large hands surprisingly gentle as he peeled away the frozen blanket and her soaked coat. "Need to get you out of these wet things," he said, his voice matter of fact. "You'll die if we don't warm you up fast." He grabbed thick wool blankets from a chest and wrapped her in them, then added more wood to the fire until it roared. Still she shook. He cursed quietly, then made another decision. He shrugged off his heavy coat and boots, then climbed under the blankets with her, pulling her against his body and wrapping his arms around her. Rebecca knew she should be scandalized, should protest this impropriety, but she was too cold to care about propriety. Besides, the heat coming off him was like a miracle. She pressed closer instinctively, seeking that warmth like a flower turning toward the sun. "I have to go back and help your driver," he said after a few minutes. "But the fire's strong now. Keep these blankets around you and stay right here." "I won't be long." She wanted to ask him not to go, wanted to beg him to keep holding her because for the first time in forever she felt warm and safe. But he was already pulling away, already putting his coat back on. He looked down at her, and something flickered in those ice-blue eyes. "My name's Marcus Jennings," he said. "You're safe here, I promise." Then he was gone, back out into the storm. Rebecca huddled in the blankets that still held his warmth and stared into the fire. Slowly, painfully, feelings started returning to her fingers and toes. It hurt worse than the cold had, pins and needles stabbing through her extremities. She bit her lip to keep from crying out. Time passed strangely. She might have dozed off, might have just fallen into that strange state between sleep and waking. When the door opened again, she jerked awake, her heart hammering. But it was Marcus, covered in snow with Patterson stumbling in behind him. "Got the horses settled in the lean-to," Marcus said, helping Patterson to a chair near the fire. "Wagons too broke to move tonight, but we can deal with that when the storm passes." Patterson's face was gray with cold and exhaustion. "I'm much obliged, mister. We'd be dead out there if not for you." Marcus just nodded and started making coffee, moving around his cabin with easy familiarity. Rebecca watched him from her nest of blankets, studying him in the firelight. His hands were huge, scarred from hard work, but they moved with precision as he measured coffee grounds and set the pot on an iron hook over the flames. His muscles shifted beneath his wool shirt with each movement, powerful and controlled. He looked like he could tear down a tree with his bare hands, but he handled the coffee pot like it was made of glass. "You got a name, miss?" he asked without looking at her. "Rebecca," she managed, her voice hoarse from the cold. "Rebecca Morgan." "Where were you headed, Miss Morgan?" "Seligman. My aunt lives there, runs a boarding house." She paused. "My parents died last spring. She's my only family left." Marcus nodded slowly, pouring coffee into 3 tin cups. He brought her one, and their fingers brushed as she took it. Even that brief contact sent warmth shooting up her arm. She wrapped both hands around the cup and sipped carefully. It was strong and bitter and the best thing she'd ever tasted. "Storm like this could last days," Marcus said. "You're both welcome to stay until it's safe to travel." "Days." Patterson looked worried. "I got business in Seligman. people expecting me. And they'll understand when you show up alive instead of frozen in a drift, Marcus said flatly. Only a fool tries to travel in a Wyoming blizzard. Patterson opened his mouth to argue, then thought better of it. This man had saved their lives. If he said the storm was too dangerous, it probably was. Rebecca drank her coffee and watched the fire. The warmth was spreading through her now, chasing away the bone-deep cold that had been her constant companion. But it wasn't just the fire that warmed her. Something about this cabin, about Marcus himself, made her feel safer than she had in months. Maybe longer. "You live out here alone?" she asked. Marcus settled into a wooden chair, his long legs stretched out toward the fire. "Mostly. Sometimes I go into town for supplies, but I prefer the mountains, quieter. Don't you get lonely?" He looked at her then, really looked at her, and Rebecca felt heat rise to her cheeks that had nothing to do with the fire. His eyes were intense, seeing too much. "Sometimes," he said quietly, "but loneliness is better than bad company." Patterson dozed off in his chair within the hour, exhausted from the ordeal. Marcus got up and draped a blanket over him, then checked the fire again. Rebecca had finally stopped shaking, but she felt wrung out, like every bit of energy had been leached from her body. "You should sleep too," Marcus said. "You can have the bed, I'll take the floor." "I can't take your bed," Rebecca protested weakly. "You can and you will. You nearly froze to death today. Your body needs rest to recover." His tone left no room for argument. The bed was in a small alcove on one side of the cabin, separated from the main room by a heavy curtain. Rebecca managed to stand, though her legs wobbled. Marcus steadied her with a hand on her elbow, then helped her over to the bed. It was simple but clean, covered with thick quilts and furs. She sank down onto it and felt her body sigh with relief. "Thank you," she whispered, "for saving us, for everything." Marcus looked uncomfortable with her gratitude. "Get some rest, Miss Morgan." He pulled the curtain closed, giving her privacy. Rebecca lay back on the bed and pulled the quilts up to her chin. She could hear Marcus moving around in the main room, the quiet sounds of him banking the fire and settling down for the night. She should have felt awkward, sleeping in a strange man's cabin, but instead she felt safe. For the first time in longer than she could remember, Rebecca Morgan was warm. And as she drifted off to sleep, she realized she couldn't remember the last time she'd felt this way. Maybe never. When she woke, gray morning light was filtering through the small window above the bed. The storm was still raging outside, wind howling around the cabin's walls. Rebecca sat up slowly, her body stiff and sore. She felt like she'd been trampled by horses, but at least she was alive and warm. She pushed the curtain aside and found Marcus at the table, cleaning a rifle. Patterson was still asleep in the chair, snoring softly. Marcus looked up when he heard her move. "How do you feel?" he asked. "Sore, tired, but better." She moved closer to the fire, which was already burning strong. "Thank you again. You said that last night, I know, but I mean it." He went back to cleaning the rifle, but she caught the hint of a smile tugging at his mouth. "There's cornbread and bacon on the stove. Help yourself." Rebecca realized she was starving. She couldn't remember the last time she'd eaten. She found a plate and loaded it with food, then sat at the other end of the table. The bacon was crispy and the cornbread was still warm. It was simple food but tasted like heaven. "You're a good cook," she said between bites. "Living alone, you learn quick or you starve." He finished with the rifle and set it aside, then finally looked at her properly. "Your color's better. You were pale as death last night." "I felt like death." She hesitated. "Can I ask you something? You just did." She smiled despite herself. "How did you find us?" "In all that white in the storm, how did you even know we were out there?" Marcus stood and poured himself coffee. "I was checking my traps when the storm hit." Heard your wagon wheel break. Sound carries strange in the mountains. He leaned against the wall, the cup looking small in his large hands. Knew someone was in trouble. You risked your life for strangers. Couldn't leave you to die. Some men would have. His jaw tightened. Then they're not men worth knowing. Rebecca studied him, this mountain man who'd saved her life without hesitation. Everything about him spoke of strength and capability. The way he moved, the way he held himself, the way he seemed completely at home in this harsh wilderness. His shoulders were so broad they strained against his shirt, and she could see the outline of powerful muscles beneath the fabric. His hands were calloused and scarred, hands that had worked hard for years. But there was a gentleness in how he'd handled her last night, a care that spoke of a good heart beneath all that rough exterior. "How long have you lived up here?" she asked. 5 years, give or take. He drank his coffee, his eyes distant. Came west after the war, tried city living for a while but couldn't stand it. Too many people, too much noise. Mountains suit me better. You fought in the war with the Union, Wyoming Regiment. He said it simply, without pride or shame, just fact. Rebecca wanted to ask more, wanted to know everything about this man who'd appeared out of the blizzard like something from a story. But Patterson stirred then, waking with a groan and a confused look around. "Morning," Marcus said. "Food's on the stove." The day passed slowly. The storm showed no signs of letting up, wind battering the cabin walls and snow piling higher outside the windows. Marcus kept the fire going and cooked meals that were simple but filling. Patterson spent most of the time dozing or staring into the fire. But Rebecca found herself watching Marcus, fascinated by everything he did. He moved around the cabin with quiet efficiency, checking supplies and mending a rip in one of his shirts with neat, careful stitches. His hands were so large the needle looked ridiculous in his fingers, but he sewed better than she did. When he caught her watching, she felt heat rise to her face. "My mother taught me," he said a man should be able to take care of himself. She sounds like a wise woman. She was. Past tense. The weight of old grief in those 2 words, "I'm sorry." Marcus shrugged. "Life's hard, people die. That's just how it is." But there was pain beneath the gruff words, carefully hidden but still there. As evening fell, Marcus made stew with dried meat and vegetables from his stores. The 3 of them ate together at the table, and Rebecca felt something strange unfurling in her chest, something like contentment. It had been so long since she'd felt this way, since she'd sat at a table with other people and felt safe and warm and fed. Her parents had been good people, but after they died she'd been alone, struggling to survive, always cold and hungry and afraid. Here in this mountain cabin with a storm raging outside, she felt none of those things. She felt protected, cared for. And it was all because of the quiet, intense man sitting across from her, whose ice-blue eyes kept finding hers and holding her gaze a moment too long to be casual. That night, Marcus insisted she take the bed again. She wanted to argue but knew it would be pointless. As she lay in the darkness, listening to the storm, she found herself thinking about what would happen when it ended. They would go on to Seligman. She would meet her aunt and start her new life, and Marcus would stay here in his mountain cabin, alone. The thought made her chest ache. The storm lasted 3 days. 3 days of being trapped in the small cabin with Marcus and Patterson, of learning to read the subtle expressions that crossed Marcus's weathered face, of discovering that, beneath his gruff exterior, was a kind and thoughtful man who noticed when she was cold and added more wood to the fire without being asked, who made sure she ate enough at every meal, who told stories about the mountains that made her laugh. Patterson remained polite but distant, clearly uncomfortable with the forced intimacy of their situation. But Rebecca found herself wishing the storm would last longer, which was ridiculous. She'd nearly died out there. She should be desperate to leave, to get to Seligman and safety. But Seligman meant strangers and uncertainty. This cabin meant warmth and Marcus. On the fourth morning, Rebecca woke to silence. The wind had finally stopped. She pushed aside the curtain and found Marcus already up, standing by the window and looking out. "Storms past," he said without turning around. "Skies clearing," her heart sank. "So we can leave. Should be able to fix that wagon wheel well enough to get you into town. It's only about 5 miles from here." He finally looked at her. "You'll be with your aunt by tonight." Rebecca should have felt relief. Instead, she felt like something precious was slipping through her fingers. "That's good news," she made herself say. Marcus's expression was unreadable. He turned back to the window without responding. By mid-morning, Marcus and Patterson had managed to repair the wagon wheel with wood from Marcus's supply shed. It wasn't pretty, but it would hold for the short journey into Seligman. Rebecca packed up the few possessions she'd brought, her movements slow and reluctant. Marcus loaded her trunk onto the wagon, his muscles flexing beneath his coat with the effort. She watched him work, memorizing every detail. The way his long hair fell forward over his face, the concentration in his eyes, the strength in every movement. "All set," Patterson said, climbing onto the driver's seat. "We should get moving while the weather holds." Rebecca knew she had to go, but her feet wouldn't move toward the wagon. She looked at Marcus, at this man who'd saved her life and given her warmth and made her feel things she'd never felt before. Things she couldn't name but knew were important. "I don't know how to thank you," she said, her voice unsteady. No thanks needed. But his eyes said something different. Something that made her breath catch. "Marcus, She didn't know how to finish the sentence. What could she say? That she didn't want to leave. That being near him made her feel alive for the first time in her life. That the thought of never seeing him again made her chest tight with grief. "Miss Morgan, we need to go," Patterson called from the wagon. Marcus stepped closer, so close she had to tilt her head back to look at him. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and brushed a strand of hair from her face. His fingers were rough and warm against her cheek. "You stay warm now," he said quietly. "No more freezing half to death on mountain trails." "I'll try." She managed a shaky smile. Will you come into town sometime to visit?" Something flickered in his eyes. Hope maybe, or longing. "Maybe," he said. "If you want me to, I do." The words came out more intensely than she'd meant them to. "I really do." His hand lingered on her face for another moment, then fell away. "Better go before Patterson leaves without you." Rebecca forced herself to turn, to walk to the wagon, to climb up onto the seat. As Patterson urged the horses forward, she twisted around to look back at the cabin. Marcus stood in front of it, tall and solid against the snow, watching them go. She lifted her hand in a wave. He raised his in return, then they rounded a bend and he was gone. The ride into Seligman was quiet. Rebecca felt hollowed out, empty in a way that had nothing to do with hunger or cold. Patterson seemed to sense her mood and didn't try to make conversation. The landscape around them was beautiful, all white peaks and dark pine forests, but she barely saw it. She kept thinking about Marcus's hand on her face, his voice when he'd said maybe, the look in his eyes. Seligman was a small town nestled in a valley, maybe 30 buildings in all. Patterson drove straight to the boarding house, a 2-story wooden structure with a sign reading Morgan House hanging above the door. So her aunt had kept the family name even after marriage. A woman came out as the wagon pulled up. She was tall and thin, with Rebecca's same dark hair streaked through with gray. Her face was lined and stern, but her eyes softened when she saw Rebecca. "You must be my niece," she said. "I'm Margaret Morgan. Your father was my brother." She paused. "You look like him." Rebecca climbed down from the wagon, her legs stiff from the ride. "Thank you for taking me in, Aunt Margaret." "Family's family." Margaret's gaze went to Patterson. "You're late. I expected you 3 days ago. Storm caught us on the mountain," Patterson explained. "Wagon broke. Would have died if not for a mountain man who took us in." Margaret's eyebrows rose. "Mountain man, not Marcus Jennings." Rebecca's heart jumped at the sound of his name. "Yes, that's him. Do you know him?" "Everyone knows Marcus. He comes into town for supplies every few weeks." Margaret studied Rebecca with sharp eyes. "Keeps to himself mostly, but he's a good man. Honest. Helped old Tom Parker through a hard winter last year, wouldn't take any payment for it." Rebecca felt relief wash through her. She'd known Marcus was good, had felt it in her bones, but hearing it confirmed made something settle inside her. "Come on then," Margaret said. "Let's get you inside and warmed up. Patterson, bring her trunk in and I'll pay you what's owed." The boarding house was clean and comfortable, if a bit sparse. Margaret showed Rebecca to a small room on the second floor with a window overlooking the main street. A bed, a dresser, a washstand. Simple but more than Rebecca had hoped for. "You'll earn your keep," Margaret said. "I need help with the cooking and cleaning and sometimes serving meals when we have boarders. In exchange, you get room and board and a small wage. Sound fair?" "More than fair. Thank you." Margaret's expression softened slightly. "I know I'm not your parents' girl, but I'll do right by you." "Your blood." After Margaret left, Rebecca sat on the bed and looked around her new room. It was nice, comfortable, warm. This was her fresh start, her new life. She should be happy. But all she could think about was a cabin in the mountains and a man with ice-blue eyes who'd held her close and kept her warm. The days fell into a rhythm. Rebecca rose early to help Margaret prepare breakfast for the boarders, mostly men who worked at the lumber mill or the mining operation up in the hills. She cleaned rooms, did laundry, helped with dinner. The work was hard, but she didn't mind. It kept her busy, kept her from thinking too much. Except at night, when she lay in bed and remembered the feeling of Marcus's arms around her, the steady beat of his heart beneath her ear, the way he'd looked at her like she was something precious. 2 weeks passed. Then 3. Rebecca threw herself into her work and tried to build a life in Seligman. A few of the younger men in town showed interest in her, but she politely deflected their attention. She told herself she was just getting settled, wasn't ready for courting, but the truth was simpler and more complicated. She was waiting for Marcus. Every time the door to the boarding house opened, her heart jumped. Every time she walked down the main street, her eyes scanned the faces looking for him. But he didn't come. Maybe he'd changed his mind. Maybe whatever connection she'd felt between them had been one-sided, a product of extreme circumstances and her own desperate need for warmth and safety. Maybe to him she'd just been another person in need of help, nothing special. The thought made her chest ache. It was a month after the blizzard when Margaret mentioned him. They were preparing dinner, and Margaret was telling her about the various people in town. "Marcus Jennings came in for supplies today," Margaret said casually, too casually. "Asked about you." Rebecca nearly dropped the pot she was holding. "He did. Wanted to know if you'd settled in all right, if you had everything you needed." Margaret gave her a knowing look. "Seemed real interested in how you were doing." "What did you tell him?" "The truth, that you're working hard and doing well." Margaret paused. "Why didn't you go talk to him yourself? You were in the storeroom, but you could have come out." "I didn't know he was here." Rebecca felt frustration and longing war inside her. She'd missed him. He'd been right there and she'd missed him. "He'll be back," Margaret said. "Always comes in once a month like clockwork. Usually stays the night at the boarding house too when the weather's bad or if it's late." Rebecca's heart hammered. "When? When will he come back?" "Hard to say. Could be a week, could be 3. Margaret studied her. "You sweet on him, girl." Rebecca opened her mouth to deny it, then stopped. What was the point? I don't know. Maybe he saved my life and he was so kind, and when I'm around him I feel. She struggled for words. Warm, safe, like I'm home. Margaret's stern expression softened into something almost tender. That's how I felt about my late husband, God rest him. Like coming home. She sighed. Marcus is a good man, but he's had a hard life. War did something to him, changed him. That's why he lives up in those mountains, away from people. Don't expect him to be easy, Rebecca. I don't expect anything, Rebecca said quietly. I just want to see him again. Then you will. Just be patient. But patience had never been Rebecca's strong suit. As the days crawled by, she found herself restless and distracted. She'd catch herself staring out the window, watching the street. Hoping. It was 6 weeks after the blizzard when it happened. Rebecca was serving breakfast to a table of miners when she felt eyes on her. She turned and froze. Marcus stood in the doorway of the boarding house dining room, looking impossibly large and out of place among the tables and chairs. His long hair was tied back and he'd trimmed his beard, but otherwise he looked the same, strong and solid and real. His ice-blue eyes found hers and locked on. Rebecca forgot how to breathe. Marcus, Margaret said, bustling over. Good to see you. You need a room. Yes, madam, he said, but he was still looking at Rebecca. Just for tonight. We've got space. Rebecca, show Marcus to room 4 while I get his breakfast ready. Rebecca set down the coffee pot with shaking hands and moved toward the stairs. Marcus followed, his footsteps heavy on the wooden floor. She was intensely aware of him behind her, of his presence filling the narrow stairway. At room 4, she unlocked the door with fumbling fingers and pushed it open. Here you are, she said, her voice coming out breathier than she'd intended. Breakfast will be ready soon. She started to leave, but Marcus caught her wrist gently. His hand was warm and rough, and she remembered exactly how it had felt when he'd brushed her hair from her face. Rebecca. Just her name, but the way he said it made her insides melt. I wanted to come sooner, but I didn't know if. If what? She turned to face him fully, looking up into those intense eyes. If you'd want to see me. He released her wrist but didn't step back. We met under strange circumstances. Thought maybe once you got settled, once you had time to think, you'd realize I'm just some rough mountain man with nothing to offer. Rebecca's heart clenched. Is that really what you think? It's the truth, isn't it? His voice was rough. You're young and pretty and sweet. You could have any man in town. Why would you want someone like me? Because, Rebecca said, stepping closer to him, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to hold his gaze, you're the first person in my entire life who made me feel warm. Not just from the fire or blankets. Warm inside. Safe, like I mattered. Marcus's eyes widened slightly. He lifted his hand slowly and cupped her cheek, exactly like he had the day she'd left his cabin. You do matter. You matter a lot, so do you. She covered his hand with hers. I've thought about you every day since I left, hoped you'd come. Waited for you. I'm here now, he said quietly. I know. She smiled, feeling happiness bubble up inside her. Don't leave. I have to eventually. Can't live in town. I need the mountains. I know that too. I'm not asking you to change. She took a breath, gathering courage. I just want to know if what I feel is real, if you feel it too. Marcus's thumb stroked across her cheekbone. I feel it. Felt it from the moment I saw you half frozen in that snow. Scared the hell out of me. Why? Because I'd gotten used to being alone. Thought I preferred it that way. Then you show up and suddenly alone doesn't feel peaceful anymore. It just feels lonely. Rebecca felt tears prick her eyes, but they were good tears. Happy tears. Marcus Jennings, are you saying you missed me? Every damn day, he admitted. His other hand came up to frame her face, holding her like she was something precious and fragile. Every night I'd lie in that cabin and remember how you felt in my arms, How right it felt, drove me half crazy. So what do we do about it? I don't know. His voice was heavy with frustration. I'm no good at this, Rebecca. At relationships, at courting, at any of it. I live in the wilderness. I go days without seeing another soul. That's not a life for someone like you. Someone like me, she pulled back slightly. What does that mean? Someone who deserves better. A real home, a real life, safety and comfort and all the things I can't give you. Rebecca felt a spark of anger cut through her happiness. Don't I get a say in what I deserve, in what I want? Of course you do, but no buts. She grabbed the front of his shirt, holding tight. I spent my whole life being cold, Marcus. Cold in body and cold in spirit. My parents loved me, but we were always struggling, always barely surviving. They died and I was even more alone. Then I met you and for the first time ever I felt warm. That means something. It does, he agreed. But warmth isn't enough to build a life on. Maybe not, but it's a start. She looked up at him, willing him to understand. I'm not asking for promises or forever, not yet. I'm just asking for a chance. Can you give me that? Marcus stared down at her, conflict clear in his eyes. She could see him wrestling with it, with fear and hope and desire all tangled together. Finally, slowly, he nodded. A chance, he said. I can give you that. Then he leaned down and kissed her, and Rebecca's world exploded into warmth and light and feeling. His lips were gentle despite the roughness of his beard, careful like he was afraid of breaking her. She kissed him back with everything she had, pouring all her longing and hope into it. His arms came around her, pulling her close, and she was surrounded by his warmth and strength and the solid reality of him. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathing hard. Marcus rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed. You're going to be the death of me, Rebecca Morgan, he murmured. Good, she said, and felt him smile. They heard Margaret calling from downstairs that breakfast was ready. Marcus reluctantly released her, his hands trailing down her arms before letting go completely. Better go down before your aunt comes looking, he said. Probably a good idea. But Rebecca didn't move immediately. She was too busy memorizing this moment, this feeling. Marcus, I'm glad you came. Me too. He brushed a quick kiss across her forehead. Now go on, I'll be down in a minute. Rebecca floated down the stairs, feeling like her feet weren't quite touching the ground. Margaret took one look at her flushed face and knowing smile and just shook her head. Told you he'd come back, was all she said. Marcus stayed in town for 2 days, and they were the best 2 days of Rebecca's life. He spent time helping around the boarding house, fixing things that needed repair and chopping wood for the stove. The physical work made his muscles flex and shift beneath his shirt, and Rebecca found herself distracted more than once watching him work. They talked whenever they could steal moments together. He told her about his life before the mountains, about growing up on a farm in Ohio and joining the army at 18. About the war and the things he'd seen that still haunted his dreams. About coming west afterward, looking for peace and silence and space to breathe. She told him about her childhood, about loving parents who'd worked themselves to exhaustion trying to provide. About watching them waste away from fever and being powerless to help. About the fear and loneliness that had followed. I used to think I'd always be cold, she admitted one evening. They were sitting on the porch of the boarding house, watching the sun set over the mountains. Like it was just part of who I was, something I had to accept. Marcus reached over and took her hand, lacing their fingers together. His palm was rough and warm. And now I know it doesn't have to be that way. That warmth is possible. You showed me that. He brought her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles, a gesture so tender it made her chest ache. I want to keep you warm, Rebecca, but I need you to understand what that means. My cabin's small and simple. Winters are hard. You'd be isolated, far from town and people. It's not an easy life." "I know." She squeezed his hand. "But maybe I don't want easy. Maybe I just want real. You haven't even seen the cabin in daylight. Might change your mind when you do." "Then show me." She turned to face him fully. "Let me come visit, see how you live, then I can make a real choice." Marcus studied her face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "All right. Sunday, if the weather holds, I'll come get you and bring you up to the cabin for the day. But Rebecca—" He cupped her face with his free hand. "If you decide it's too much, if you want to stay in town and have a normal life, I'll understand. Won't hold it against you." "I know you won't." She leaned into his touch. "That's one of the things I love about you." The word hung between them. Love. She'd said it without thinking, but now that it was out there, Rebecca realized it was true. Somewhere between freezing to death in a blizzard and this moment on the porch, she'd fallen completely in love with Marcus Jennings. His expression shifted into something intense and vulnerable. "Rebecca." "You don't have to say it back," she said quickly. "I know it's fast, maybe too fast, but it's how I feel and I don't want to hide it." "It is fast," he agreed. His thumb stroked across her cheekbone. "But I'd be lying if I said I didn't feel the same way, been trying not to. Telling myself it's too soon, too much. But the truth is I started falling for you the moment I carried you out of that storm." Joy flooded through her, bright and warm. "Yeah, yeah." He smiled, really smiled, and it transformed his whole face, made him look younger, lighter. "You scared me to death, being so cold and still. All I could think was that I had to keep you warm, had to save you. And once you were safe, I couldn't stop thinking about you." Rebecca leaned in and kissed him, soft and sweet. "I'm glad you found me," she whispered against his lips. "I'm glad the wagon broke and the storm hit and everything that led me to you. Even almost dying, even that." She pulled back to look at him. "Because it brought me home." Marcus pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her and resting his chin on top of her head. They sat like that as the sun disappeared behind the mountains and the first stars appeared, neither of them wanting to move, neither wanting to let go. Sunday came with clear skies and cold, crisp air. Marcus arrived at the boarding house just after breakfast, leading a gentle mare he'd borrowed from the livery. "For you," he said, helping Rebecca mount. "It's about an hour ride to the cabin." Margaret came out to see them off, bundling Rebecca into a thick coat and scarf. "You be safe, girl." "And Marcus Jennings, you have her back before dark or I'll come up there myself." "Yes, madam," Marcus said seriously, but Rebecca caught the hint of amusement in his eyes. They rode out of town together, Marcus on his big gelding and Rebecca on the mare. The trail up into the mountains was beautiful, winding through pine forests and past frozen streams. Marcus pointed out landmarks and told her stories about the area, clearly comfortable in this wilderness he called home. The cabin looked different in daylight. Smaller than Rebecca remembered, but sturdy and well-built. Smoke curled from the chimney and the lean-to beside it housed Marcus's horse and a milk cow. "You have a cow," Rebecca said, surprised. "Got her last year. Means fresh milk and butter. Makes winter easier." He helped her down from the mare and led both horses to the lean-to. "Come on, I'll show you around." Inside, the cabin was neat and organized. Everything had its place. Firewood stacked by the hearth, supplies on shelves, tools hung on the walls. It was clearly the home of someone who lived alone but took pride in his space. "It's not much," Marcus said, suddenly seeming uncertain, "but it's solid. Keeps the cold out, keeps me dry." "It's wonderful," Rebecca said honestly. She ran her hand along the table he'd made himself, admiring the craftsmanship. "You built all this, most of it. Table, chairs, bed frame. Had to buy the stove and some other things in town, but the rest I made." She looked at him with newfound appreciation. "You're talented." He shrugged, embarrassed. "Just practical. Can't buy much up here, so you learn to make what you need." Marcus showed her around outside, pointing out his traps and the small garden plot he'd planted come spring. He had everything he needed to survive up here, she realized. He was completely self-sufficient. "Don't you ever get lonely?" she asked as they stood looking out over the valley below. The view was breathtaking, mountains stretching as far as the eye could see. "Used to tell myself I didn't," Marcus admitted, "that I preferred the solitude. But after you left," he trailed off, jaw tight. "The cabin felt empty, too quiet, kept waiting to hear your voice, to see you by the fire." Rebecca slipped her hand into his. "I felt the same way. The boarding house is nice and Aunt Margaret's been kind, but it doesn't feel like home." "And this does." He gestured at the cabin, the wilderness around them. "You do," she corrected. "Wherever you are feels like home." Marcus turned to face her, his expression serious. "I need you to be sure, Rebecca, really sure, because if you come up here to live, it won't be easy. Winters are long and hard. We might go weeks without seeing another person. You'd have to learn to hunt, to trap, to do things you've probably never done before, and there's always danger. Bears, wolves, mountain lions. The cold itself can kill you if you're not careful. I know all that." She squeezed his hand. "I'm not naive, Marcus. I know it would be hard, but I've had easy and I've had safe, and they both left me feeling empty and cold. With you, I feel alive. You might change your mind after a winter up here. Then let me try. One winter. Let me stay with you and see how it goes. If I can't handle it, I'll go back to town in the spring, but at least give me the chance." Marcus searched her face, looking for doubt or uncertainty. Whatever he saw there must have satisfied him, because he nodded slowly. "One winter," he agreed. "But we do it right. We get married first." Rebecca's heart jumped. "Married? I'm not having you up here without making it proper. People in town already talk enough about the mountain man living alone in the wilderness. Not going to give them reason to talk about you too." His expression softened. "Besides, I want you to be my wife. Want it to be real and forever, not just an experiment. Is that a proposal, Marcus Jennings?" "I guess it is." He pulled her close, his hand settling on her waist. "I know I'm not much of a catch. No money, no prospects, just a cabin in the mountains and a man who's better with animals than people. But I love you, Rebecca. Love you more than I thought I could love anyone. And if you'll have me, I promise I'll spend the rest of my life keeping you warm and safe." Tears spilled down Rebecca's cheeks, but she was smiling so hard her face hurt. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I'll marry you. I love you too, so much it scares me sometimes." Marcus lifted her right off her feet, spinning her around before kissing her thoroughly. When he finally set her down, they were both breathless and grinning like fools. "When?" Rebecca asked. "When should we get married?" "Soon as possible. No point waiting." He tucked a strand of her hair behind her ear. "Unless you want a big wedding, all the trimmings." "I just want you," she said honestly. "Everything else is just details." They rode back to town as the sun was setting, Rebecca's hand clasped in Marcus's. Her mind was spinning with plans and possibilities. She was getting married. She was going to be Marcus's wife, was going to live in that cabin in the mountains and build a life with him. Margaret took one look at their joined hands and radiant faces and knew. "Well," she said dryly, "I guess I'm losing my helper." "We want to get married," Rebecca said, unable to keep the joy from her voice. "As soon as possible. Figured as much." But Margaret was smiling. "The pastor can do it next Sunday if that works. Give us time to put together something proper." "We don't need anything fancy," Marcus started, but Margaret cut him off. "Hush, she's my niece and the closest thing to a daughter I've got left. We're doing this right." She looked at Rebecca. "You'll need a dress, something nice." "I don't have money for a dress," Rebecca said quietly. "I do," Margaret said firmly. "Consider it a wedding gift. We'll go to the general store tomorrow and see what Mrs. Patterson has." The next week flew by in a blur of preparations. Margaret threw herself into wedding planning with unexpected enthusiasm, enlisting the help of other women in town. Rebecca found herself swept up in it, being measured for a dress and learning about the food Margaret planned for the small reception. Marcus stayed in town, helping with preparations and spending every moment he could with Rebecca. They took walks around town, talked about their future, planned what they'd need for the winter. He was patient with her questions about mountain living, teaching her what she'd need to know. "You'll have to learn to shoot," he said one afternoon as they walked along the creek that ran behind the boarding house. "Both rifle and pistol, not just for hunting but for protection." "I've never fired a gun in my life," Rebecca admitted. "I'll teach you. You're smart and quick. You'll pick it up fast." He squeezed her hand. "I want you to be able to take care of yourself when I'm out checking traps or hunting. Need to know you're safe." "I will be. I have you, and you always will," he promised. "But humor me, learn to shoot." The dress was finished on Friday, a simple but beautiful gown in deep blue that made Rebecca's eyes look even darker. When she tried it on, Margaret actually teared up. "You look just like your mother did at your age," she said, her voice thick. "She'd be so happy for you, Rebecca. Your father, too." "I wish they could be here," Rebecca said softly. "They are, in a way. They raised a strong, brave girl who knows her own mind. That's the best gift they could have given you." Sunday arrived cold and clear. The ceremony was held in the small church at the edge of town, with most of Seligman's residents in attendance. Rebecca wore her blue dress and carried a small bouquet of dried flowers that Margaret had saved from the previous summer. Marcus wore his best shirt and trousers, his long hair tied back neatly, his beard trimmed. When Rebecca walked down the aisle toward him, his expression made her breath catch. He looked at her like she was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen, like he couldn't quite believe she was real and choosing him. The ceremony was simple, but heartfelt. They exchanged vows in front of the pastor and the congregation, promising to love and honor each other through whatever life brought. When Marcus slipped a simple gold band onto Rebecca's finger, his hands shook slightly. When she did the same for him, her eyes were bright with tears. "You may kiss your bride," the pastor said with a smile. Marcus cupped Rebecca's face in his large hands and kissed her gently, reverently, like she was something precious and sacred. The congregation applauded, and Rebecca felt happiness surge through her so intensely she thought she might burst from it. They were married. She was Rebecca Jennings now, wife to the mountain man, and she'd never felt more right about anything in her life. The reception was held at the boarding house, with food and drink and music from a fiddle player. Rebecca danced with Marcus, laughing as he admitted he had 2 left feet. They cut a cake Margaret had made and accepted well wishes from the townsfolk. Everyone seemed genuinely happy for them, even those who'd initially been skeptical about their quick courtship. As the evening wore on and the celebration continued, Marcus leaned down to whisper in Rebecca's ear. "Ready to go home, Mrs. Jennings?" Her new name sent a thrill through her. "Yes," she whispered back. "Take me home." They'd planned to leave for the cabin in the morning, but Margaret had quietly prepared room 4 for them for the night. As Marcus led Rebecca up the stairs, her heart hammered with nervousness and anticipation. They'd kissed and held each other, but this was different. This was their wedding night. Marcus seemed to sense her nerves because once they were alone in the room, he just pulled her into a gentle embrace. "We don't have to do anything you're not ready for," he murmured against her hair. "I'm happy just to hold you." "I'm ready," Rebecca said, pulling back to look up at him. "Maybe nervous, but ready. I love you, Marcus. I want this." He kissed her then, soft and sweet at first but deepening as she responded. His hands moved carefully, reverently, treating her like something precious. Rebecca let herself get lost in the sensation of being loved and cherished, of being warm in every possible way. Later, lying in Marcus's arms with her head on his chest, Rebecca listened to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat and felt complete. This was where she belonged. This was home. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. Marcus's arms tightened around her. "I love you too. More than I knew it was possible to love someone. Promise me something, anything. Promise you'll always keep me warm." She felt him smile against her hair. "That's an easy promise to make. I'll keep you warm for the rest of our lives, Rebecca, however long that is." She snuggled closer, feeling safe and loved and finally, blessedly warm. "Then I have everything I need." They left for the cabin early the next morning, Rebecca riding the mare while Marcus led on his gelding. Her belongings were packed on a mule Marcus had bought for the purpose. It wasn't much, but it was all hers. Well, all theirs now. The ride up into the mountains felt different this time. Not like she was visiting, but like she was coming home. When the cabin came into view, Rebecca felt a surge of affection for the simple structure. This was their home. The place where they'd build their life together. Marcus helped her down and led her inside. "Welcome home, wife," he said, and the word made her smile. "It's perfect," she said honestly. They spent the day settling in, Marcus showing her where everything was stored and how he organized his supplies. He explained his routine, the daily tasks that kept them fed and warm and safe. Rebecca absorbed everything, determined to be a partner rather than a burden. That night, after a simple supper, they sat together in front of the fire. Rebecca was curled against Marcus's side, his arm around her shoulders, feeling more content than she'd ever thought possible. "Tell me something," Marcus said quietly. "When did you know that you loved me?" Rebecca thought about it. "I think part of me knew that first night when you held me by the fire, but I was sure when you came to the boarding house, when you said you'd been thinking about me too. That's when I knew it was real. I knew when I was riding back to my cabin alone after leaving you in town," Marcus admitted. "Everything felt wrong, cold and empty. And I realized I didn't want to be alone anymore, not if it meant being without you." "We'll never be alone again," Rebecca said, tilting her head back to look at him. "We have each other now." "Yes, we do," he kissed her forehead. "And I'm going to make sure you never regret choosing me, choosing this life." "I won't," she said with absolute certainty. "Because wherever you are, I'm warm." The weeks turned into months, and Rebecca learned what it meant to be a mountain woman. Marcus taught her to shoot, patiently correcting her stance and aim until she could hit a target consistently. He taught her to track animals, to read the signs of coming weather, to preserve food for the winter. She learned to tan hides and chop wood, to keep the fire going and the cabin warm. It was hard work, harder than anything she'd done in town, but it was also deeply satisfying. Every skill she mastered, every task she completed, made her feel more capable and confident. And Marcus was always there, encouraging her, praising her progress, never making her feel inadequate when she struggled. She learned his routines too, the rhythm of his days. How he checked his traps every morning, how he spent afternoons chopping wood or repairing things. How he always made sure they had enough supplies laid in, always planning ahead for potential disasters. It was the careful, considered life of someone who understood how unforgiving the wilderness could be, but there was joy too. Marcus showed her the beauty of the mountains, taking her on long walks to spots with breathtaking views. They watched sunrises together from the cabin door, drank coffee in companionable silence, talked long into the night about everything and nothing. He told her stories from his past, and she shared memories of her childhood. They learned each other deeply, thoroughly, building a foundation of trust and understanding. As autumn deepened into winter, the cold became more intense. Snow fell regularly, piling up around the cabin. But Rebecca was never cold now. Marcus kept the fire burning constantly, and at night he held her close, his body heat chasing away any chill. One particularly cold night, as they lay together in bed listening to the wind howl outside, Rebecca ran her fingers through Marcus's long hair. "Can I tell you something?" she said softly, always. "I used to think being cold was just part of who I was. Like some people are tall and some are short, and I was someone who was always cold, like it was my defining characteristic." Marcus rolled to face her, propping himself up on one elbow. "And now I realize I wasn't just cold physically. I was cold inside too, lonely and scared and trying so hard to survive that I forgot to live. But you changed that." She cupped his bearded face. "You made me warm in every way that matters." His eyes were suspiciously bright in the firelight. "You did the same for me, you know. I thought I wanted to be alone, but I was just scared. Scared of letting anyone in, of being hurt, of failing someone I cared about. You made me brave enough to try again." "We saved each other," Rebecca whispered. "Yeah, I guess we did." He kissed her softly. "Best damn blizzard I ever walked into." She laughed against his lips. "Best damn broken wagon wheel, too." Winter deepened, and the snow piled higher. There were days when leaving the cabin was impossible, when the storm was too fierce and they were trapped inside. But Rebecca never felt trapped. With Marcus, even the smallest space felt like freedom. He continued teaching her everything he knew. How to set snares for rabbits, how to fish through ice, how to make jerky and pemmican that would keep for months. She proved to be a quick study, mastering skills that had taken him years to learn. He told her often how proud he was of her, how amazed he was by her strength and determination. On clear days, they would snowshoe together through the forest, checking his trap line. Rebecca learned to move quietly, to read tracks in the snow, to understand the language of the wilderness. She found she loved it up here, loved the clean, sharp air and the vast silence, loved the way the snow sparkled like diamonds in the sunlight. One afternoon in January, they were out checking traps when they spotted a wolf pack on a distant ridge. Rebecca tensed, her hand going to the rifle slung over her shoulder, but Marcus touched her arm gently. "They're not hunting us," he said quietly. "Watch." They stood still and silent, and after a moment the wolves continued on their way, disappearing into the trees. Rebecca let out a breath she hadn't known she was holding. "They're beautiful," she said, awed. "They are dangerous too, but beautiful." Marcus looked down at her, his expression fond. "You're not scared?" "A little, but mostly just amazed. A year ago I never could have imagined standing on a mountain watching wolves, never imagined any of this." "Do you miss town, miss the easier life?" Rebecca thought about it honestly. "Sometimes I miss Aunt Margaret and hot baths." They both laughed at that. "But no, I don't miss that life. This is where I belong." Marcus pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. "You're the strongest person I've ever met, Rebecca Jennings. I learned from the best." Winter finally began to loosen its grip in March. The days grew longer and slightly warmer, though snow still covered the ground. Rebecca had made it through her first mountain winter, and the accomplishment filled her with pride. She'd done it. She'd proven to herself that she could handle this life. One morning, as they were having breakfast, Rebecca realized she'd felt queasy for several days running. At first she'd attributed it to something she ate, but as the feeling persisted, a different possibility occurred to her. She counted back and felt her heart skip. "Marcus," she said carefully, "I think I might be pregnant." He froze with his coffee cup halfway to his mouth. "You think?" "You're not sure?" "Pretty sure. I'm late and I've been feeling sick in the mornings." She watched his face, trying to read his reaction. "Is that? Are you happy about it? Marcus set down his cup very carefully and came around the table to kneel beside her chair. He took both her hands in his much larger ones. Happy doesn't begin to cover it, he said, his voice rough with emotion. A baby, our baby. His eyes were bright. You're going to be a mother and you're going to be a father. Rebecca felt tears spill down her cheeks. Are you scared? I'm terrified. Scared out of my mind, he admitted with a shaky laugh. But also happier than I've ever been. We'll figure it out together, same as we've figured out everything else. As spring arrived in earnest, Marcus became increasingly protective. He insisted on doing any heavy work himself, wouldn't let Rebecca climb or reach for anything high, hovered constantly. It would have been annoying if it hadn't been so clearly motivated by love and concern. I'm pregnant, not made of glass, she told him one day when he'd taken an axe from her hands for the third time. I know, but humor me. I've never done this before and I'm terrified of something happening to you or the baby. Rebecca softened. Nothing's going to happen, we're both fine. Keep saying that so I can believe it. As her belly began to swell, they discussed what to do when her time came. Marcus wanted her in town with the doctor, but Rebecca refused. Women have been having babies in the wilderness forever, she argued. We can do this here. But what if something goes wrong? What if you need help? Then you'll help me. Marcus, I trust you more than any doctor, and this is our home. I want our baby born here. They compromised. Margaret came up to the cabin a month before Rebecca was due, bringing supplies and her own considerable experience. She'd helped deliver dozens of babies over the years and knew what to do. You picked one hell of a life, girl, Margaret said, but she was smiling. But if anyone can handle it, you can. Rebecca's son was born on a warm July night, arriving with the sunset. The labor was hard and painful, but Marcus held her hand through all of it, his presence steady and reassuring. When the baby finally arrived, wailing and red-faced and perfect, Rebecca felt a love so fierce it took her breath away. A boy, Margaret said, wrapping the infant in a clean blanket. Healthy and strong from the sound of those lungs. Marcus cut the cord with shaking hands, then Margaret placed the baby in Rebecca's arms. He was tiny and wrinkled and beautiful, with a tuft of dark hair and his father's blue eyes. Hello, little one, Rebecca whispered. Welcome to the world. Marcus knelt beside the bed, his large hand gentle on the baby's head. He looked stunned, overwhelmed with emotion. He's perfect, he said hoarsely. You're perfect. Thank you, Rebecca. Thank you for this gift. They named him Thomas after Rebecca's father, Tommy for short. Margaret stayed for 2 weeks, helping Rebecca recover and teaching her about infant care. Then she returned to town, promising to visit again soon. Those first months with a new baby were exhausting. Tommy was a good child but demanded constant attention. Rebecca was tired in a way she'd never experienced before, a bone-deep exhaustion that no amount of sleep could fully cure. But she was also happier than she'd ever been. Marcus was a devoted father, taking over whenever he could to give Rebecca a chance to rest. He'd walk with Tommy for hours when the baby was fussy, singing old army songs in his rough voice. He built a cradle with his own hands, carved wooden toys, treated their son with the same gentle care he'd always shown Rebecca. You're a natural, Rebecca told him one evening, watching him rock Tommy to sleep. I'm terrified every second that I'll break him, Marcus admitted. He's so small. You won't. You're the gentlest person I know despite all those muscles, he grinned at her. You like these muscles, don't lie. I do, she admitted. Among other things. As Tommy grew, so did their family's rhythm. The cabin that had once seemed sufficient for 2 now held 3, and they made it work. Marcus built an addition, giving them more space. Rebecca learned to manage household tasks with a baby on her hip, became expert at doing everything one-handed. Tommy's first winter was hard. Rebecca worried constantly about keeping him warm enough, about sickness, about all the things that could go wrong. But Marcus was there, steady as always, helping shoulder her fears. And Tommy thrived, growing strong and healthy in his mountain home. When spring came again, Rebecca took stock of her life. She'd been on the mountain for almost 2 full years now. She'd learned to hunt and trap, to survive and thrive in the wilderness. She'd given birth to a son and watched him grow. She'd built a life with the man she loved in a place that had become truly home. One morning, she stood on the porch with Tommy in her arms, watching the sun rise over the peaks. Marcus came up behind her, wrapping his arms around them both. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "How far I've come. Who I used to be versus who I am now." She leaned back against his solid warmth. "I used to be this cold, scared girl who was just trying to survive. And now you're a woman who can shoot straight, track a deer, and raise a child in the wilderness." He kissed her temple. "You're incredible, Rebecca." "We're incredible," she corrected. "We did all this together." Tommy started fussing and Rebecca adjusted him, rocking gently. Marcus's hand came up to stroke his son's soft hair. "Think you could handle doing this again?" he asked casually. Rebecca turned to look at him, surprised. "You want another baby?" "I want whatever you want. But yeah, I wouldn't mind. Tommy could use a sibling eventually." "Not for a while yet," Rebecca said firmly. "Let me survive his first few years first," Marcus laughed. "Fair enough." But as it turned out, fate had other plans. Rebecca was pregnant again before Tommy's second birthday, this time with a daughter they named Sarah. She had her mother's dark hair and her father's intense gaze, and from the moment she was born she had Marcus wrapped around her tiny finger. The years flowed by, marked by the seasons and the rhythm of mountain life. Rebecca and Marcus added another room to the cabin, then another. Tommy grew tall and strong like his father, learning to hunt and track almost before he could read. Sarah was quieter but just as capable, with a gift for healing that led her to study every plant and herb in the mountains. They had 2 more children, another boy named James and a girl they called Elizabeth. The cabin rang with laughter and arguments, with the sounds of a family growing and thriving together. It was loud and chaotic and sometimes overwhelming, but Rebecca loved every minute. Marcus proved to be an exceptional father, patient and kind but firm when needed. He taught his sons to be strong and honorable, taught his daughters that they were just as capable as any man. He was protective but not smothering, always pushing them to be their best while making sure they knew they were loved. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Marcus surprised Rebecca by taking her away from the cabin for the night. They rode to a high mountain meadow he'd discovered years before, where wildflowers bloomed in a riot of color and a small lake reflected the sky. "I wanted to give you something special," he said as they sat by the lake, watching the sunset. 10 years married and you've never once complained about this life, never said you wanted to go back to town." "Because I don't," Rebecca said simply. "This is where I'm happiest, with you. Still, you gave up a lot to be with me, comfort, society, an easier life. Wanted you to know I don't take that for granted." Rebecca took his hand, lacing their fingers together. "Marcus Jennings, I gave up nothing and gained everything. You saved me that night in the blizzard, but not just from freezing. You saved me from a life of being cold and alone and just existing. You taught me what it means to really live. You did the same for me," he said quietly. "I was so alone before you, even though I told myself I preferred it. You brought warmth and light and love into my life, made me a better man. You were always a good man, I just helped you see it." They made love under the stars that night, slow and tender, and full of all the love they'd built over a decade together. Afterward, Lying in Marcus's arms with his heartbeat steady beneath her ear, Rebecca thought about that scared, cold girl who'd climbed into a wagon heading for Seligman all those years ago. She'd been looking for shelter, for a place to stay. Instead, she'd found home. The years continued to pass, bringing both joy and challenges. There were harsh winters and failed hunts, sickness and injury, and all the hardships that came with mountain living. But through it all, Rebecca and Marcus stood together, their love the foundation that everything else was built on. Their children grew and eventually began to leave. Tommy fell in love with a girl from town and built his own cabin on the other side of the mountain. Sarah became a sought-after healer, splitting her time between the mountains and Seligman. James and Elizabeth were still young, still at home, but the day would come when they'd leave too. "Empty nest," Rebecca said one evening after Tommy's wedding, when it was just her and Marcus sitting by the fire like they had so many nights before. "Not empty yet. Still got two at home." Marcus pulled her close. "But yeah, things are changing. Does it make you sad?" He thought about it. "A little, but also proud. We raised good kids who know their own minds and can take care of themselves. That's what parents are supposed to do. When did you get so wise? Had a good teacher." He kissed the top of her head. "Besides, means I get to spend more time with just you. Not complaining about that." Rebecca smiled against his chest. 20 years of marriage and she still felt the same flutter when he held her, still found herself watching him work and marveling at his strength. Still loved him with an intensity that sometimes took her breath away. "I never told you," she said quietly, "how grateful I am for everything. You don't need to, I know. But I want to. Marcus, you changed my entire life, gave me a home and a family and a reason to get up every morning. Taught me what it means to be warm, inside and out. I was so lost before you." Marcus tilted her face up to look at him, his eyes serious. "We saved each other, remember? You gave me purpose, gave me a reason to be more than just a man hiding in the mountains. You're the best thing that ever happened to me, Rebecca Jennings, and I thank God every day that I found you in that storm. Even though I was half frozen and probably more trouble than I was worth, especially because of that," he grinned. "You made me work for it." She laughed and kissed him, tasting coffee and contentment. "I love you, still and always." "Still and always," he echoed. As they grew older, their bodies slowed, but their love never did. Marcus's hair turned gray, then white, though he remained strong and capable. Rebecca's face lined with age, her hands marked by decades of hard work, but she moved through the mountains with the confidence of someone who belonged there. They became grandparents, then great-grandparents. Their cabin was always full during holidays, with children and grandchildren crowding around the table, filling the space with noise and life. But Rebecca's favorite times were still the quiet evenings, just her and Marcus by the fire, his arm around her shoulders and her head on his chest. "Tell me something," Marcus said one winter night when they were both well into their 70s. "Do you ever regret it, choosing this life?" Rebecca didn't even have to think about it. "Never. Not for a single moment. This is exactly where I was meant to be." Even in the beginning, when it was so hard and you were learning everything from scratch, especially then. Every challenge made me stronger. Every skill I learned made me more capable. And I had you with me every step of the way, teaching me, encouraging me, loving me. She shifted to look up at him. "Why? Do you regret it?" "God, no. These have been the best years of my life. You and the kids, this place, the life we built. It's more than I ever dreamed of having. Then we did all right, didn't we? Two broken people who found each other in a blizzard and made something beautiful. More than all right. We did better than that." His arms tightened around her. "We made it perfect." On their 50th wedding anniversary, the whole family gathered at the cabin. It took some coordinating, But eventually all 4 children were there with their spouses and children, and even a few great-grandchildren. The cabin practically burst at the seams, but Rebecca loved it. That night, after everyone had gone to bed in various corners of the cabin and addition, Rebecca and Marcus slipped outside. The air was cold and crisp, stars blazing overhead like diamonds. They stood on the porch together, his arm around her waist, looking out at the mountains. 50 years, Rebecca said softly. Half a century since you found me freezing in that snow. Best decision I ever made helping you that day. Best thing that ever happened to me breaking that wagon wheel. She leaned against him, still finding perfect comfort in his solid warmth. I was so cold that day, Marcus. Cold in ways I didn't even understand. And then you held me close by the fire and I started to thaw, not just my body but my heart, my soul, everything. You did the same for me. My heart had been frozen for years, ever since the war. Thought I'd always be that way. Then this stubborn, brave woman came into my life and thawed me out. Rebecca turned to face him, reaching up to cup his weathered face. Promise me something, anything. Promise that when we're gone, when we've both moved on from this world, someone will remember our story. We'll tell our grandchildren and great-grandchildren about the mountain man who kept the fire burning and held his wife close, and the woman who was finally warm enough. Marcus leaned down and kissed her forehead, gentle and reverent. They'll remember. How could they forget? Our love is written into this mountain, into this cabin, into every tree and rock and stream. It's part of the land now, permanent as the peaks. Good, Rebecca whispered, because it's been one hell of a story. The best story, Marcus agreed, and we got to live every chapter together. They stood like that for a long time, 2 people who'd loved each other for 50 years, who'd built a life and raised a family and proven that sometimes the hardest paths lead to the best destinations. The cold wind blew around them, but they didn't feel it, wrapped up in each other as they'd been since that first night in the blizzard. Inside the cabin, the fire burned warm and bright, just as Marcus had always kept it. Just as it would keep burning for their children and grandchildren, a legacy of love and warmth passed down through generations. Rebecca had spent her whole childhood cold, had thought she'd never feel truly warm. But she'd been wrong. She'd found her warmth in the arms of a mountain man, in the life they'd built together, in the love that had sustained them through 5 decades of marriage. She was warm now. Finally, completely, perfectly warm. And she knew she always would be, as long as Marcus held her close and kept the fire burning. Years later, long after Rebecca and Marcus had both passed peacefully in their sleep on the same winter night, their great-great-granddaughter stood in front of the old cabin. It had been preserved carefully, maintained by the family as a testament to the love that had started here. She walked inside with her young daughter, showing her the fireplace where Marcus had first warmed Rebecca, the bed where they'd slept for 50 years, the table where they'd shared countless meals. Tell me the story again, Mama, the little girl said. About great-grandma Rebecca and great-grandpa Marcus. And so she did. She told about the blizzard and the broken wagon, about the mountain man who'd carried a freezing woman out of the storm, about how he'd held her close and kept the fire burning until she was warm again, about how they'd fallen in love and built a life together in these mountains, raising a family and growing old side by side. And that's why we always keep a fire burning in winter, she finished. To remember them, to honor the love that started everything. The little girl looked at the fireplace thoughtfully. Do you think they loved each other as much as you and Papa do? Her mother smiled. More. They loved each other more than seems possible, more than words can describe. It was the kind of love that changes everything. Outside, snow began to fall gently over the mountain, just as it had that night over a century ago when a wagon wheel broke and a mountain man heard the sound carrying through the storm. When he'd gone to investigate and found the woman who would change his life forever. The cabin stood strong against the wind, its walls still solid, its foundation still true. Inside, a fire crackled in the hearth, warm and bright and eternal. A testament to the love between Rebecca Morgan and Marcus Jennings, the woman who'd never felt warm enough and the mountain man who'd spent his life making sure she never felt cold again. Their story lived on, passed down through generations, a reminder that sometimes the coldest moments lead to the warmest love. That sometimes breaking down is actually a blessing in disguise. That sometimes the person who saves you is actually the person you're meant to find. And that love, real love, is the kind of warmth that never fades. The kind that burns eternal, bright and strong and true, keeping the cold at bay forever. The fire burned on in the old cabin, a symbol and a promise. As long as there was wood to burn and hearts to remember, the warmth of their love would never die. It would live on in their descendants, in the stories told around winter fires, in the knowledge that once upon a time in these mountains, two people found each other in a blizzard and created something that would last forever. Rebecca Jennings had finally found her warmth. And Marcus Jennings had found his purpose. Together, they'd found home,